dear students, dear business relations of Fontys University of Applied Sciences. I hope you can all understand me well. A very warm welcome at our fourth webinar in a row of 5 webinars in total. We organized this year under the name Discovering the Dutch-German Business World, organized by our Fontys Research Group Cross-Border Business Development. I'm very happy that you're all here online. Unfortunately, still not offline, face-to-face, but well, at least happy that we can organize a webinar in which you're all participating, even at this very nice sunny, I think one of the final sunny and warm days this year. Today's lecture or today's webinar will be about competences in cross-border recruitment, with the central question, are you competent to cross the border? And before I will introduce the speakers of today, I would like to introduce myself very shortly as the moderator, your host of today. My name is Vincent Pijnenburg, for the people who don't know me yet, and I'm the lector, professor of the research group Cross-Border Business Development at the Fontys International Business School in Venlo. And our team is funded by the province of Limburg and Rabobank Noord-Limburg. So as well, this activity is sponsored by them. Before we start, I would like to mention or repeat, as I did before the summer break as well, the instructions for using MS Teams for the people who don't know yet after working online for more than 6 months. But I would like to ask you to turn off your micros and cameras during the presentation. Feel free to ask questions. So you'll know, I think, how to use the chat function. I put some messages in the chat function already a couple of minutes ago. So feel free to add questions, ask questions as much as you want. The speakers of today will tell you if they will answer your questions during or after their presentation. And of course, you will also get a chance to ask questions by turning on your micro and camera so that we can see you as well. Well, as you can hear, the webinar will be held in English today, since we have many international students attending this workshop today online. But feel free to ask questions or to share your comments in the language you prefer. So whether it is in Dutch or German or English, that's all fine. And I think the speakers today are capable to answer the questions in the language you prefer as well. Well, let's go to the content of today. Competences in cross-border recruitment. And I think it's a very interesting topic for that reason that we see that people in border regions are more and more stimulated and encouraged to search for a job across the border. But what we often forget is if there is a need match between supply and demand in terms of competences and in the way employers and employees on the other side do define the competences well, they have or the employers are looking for on both sides of the border. So the interesting question is there a kind of mismatch between the Dutch and the German side of the border in terms of competences and the definition of different competences, or will we define competences in the same way? Well, that's a question, a research question, which our senior researcher of our team, Pieter van Goinga, is focusing on for already more than a year. Also, as part of his PhD study he is carrying out at the moment in cooperation with Maastricht University. And he can tell you everything about this topic, and he will do that today. But he's not the only speaker of today's program. Since last year, we had a very good student, former student, doing her graduation assignment for our team. She wrote her thesis for our research group, Her name is Lisa Brünninghaus from Germany, and well, she will share her contributions. She contributed to our team last year, and in particular to Pieter Vergoverga's research project. At the moment, Lisa is working for Porsche Bank AG in Salzburg. I'm very happy that you're here today, Lisa, as well online, and contributing to this webinar of today, which will be very interactive, I can promise you. So feel free to ask questions. Welcome once again, and I hope you're going to enjoy this webinar. We will, well, finish the webinar at the latest on 17:15, so 5:15. And for now, I would like to give the floor to you, Pieter.
Okay, thank you, Vincent. Thank you for that nice introduction. Yeah, so it's my turn now to kick off this webinar and welcome you all for this very interesting topic. I understand that Vincent will keep good track of time and interrupt us when we start to violate the time limits. So very good. But please feel free to ask questions either in the chat or by raising your virtual hand. Yeah, we are with a group of about 36 to 40 people, so that should be manageable. So today I will be giving you an idea of competences in cross-border recruitment and hopefully answer that question: are you competent to cross the border? And what we'll find is that there are many different ways to look at this. And so I've not developed, but I use a framework to look at recruitment as a whole, and we'll find that competences play their role in different phases. And we're going to have a look at two more specific phases, and knowing that, of course, there's much more to it. But first of all, who are we? And then my presentation would have to work with me. Yes, there it is. So my name is Pieter van Goinga, and as Vincent already indicated, I'm a PhD candidate working together with University of Maastricht, where my main topic is actually this cross-border job placements. But in the past, I've been an HR professional. I've been dealing with global mobility, and I've been working in Germany and the Netherlands in HR roles, which means that also I would consider myself to be somewhat of an expert by experience. You'll hear a bit more about that later on. Lisa, may I ask you to briefly introduce yourself so people know who will be joining us later for your presentation?
Yes, so thank you for the introduction. My name is Lisa, I'm 23 years old, and as Vincent already told you, I successfully graduated in July this year from the course International Business. Right now I work for the Porsche Bank in Salzburg. I started my graduation internship there, but it has been paused due to Corona, unfortunately. So I wrote my bachelor thesis in the research group, and now I started my internship again abroad.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So let me begin by telling you how it all started, what triggered me to look into this topic, and why I think this topic is so interesting. Because a few years ago, before I started working for Universities of Applied Science, as I said, I was an HR professional, and I worked in Germany. And being Dutch, I had this certain experience of how leadership functions. And you can see in the right-hand side of the picture, leadership, if you would take, for instance, the purple cone, the leaders are somewhere in the middle and people are around them. And you know, they connect people, they facilitate people. And that's maybe also a very stereotype image, but that was something I was used to and used to working with. And then when I moved to Germany to work there, I found myself in an environment that much more like the picture on the left, and maybe you recognize the differences. Because there I was part of a group, and we had a leader that was a few steps away from us, and we were clearly separated. And to be quite honest, that did not work for me, and I wasn't quite happy in that job, partly because of that and because of that difference, and I somehow couldn't get used to it. But it did get me triggered on thinking about, so what is it? Why don't I like it here? And of course, the obvious answer, ladies and gentlemen, is, oh, it's culture or it's behavior. And, that's true, but still, there are questions that remain unanswered as, how could I have prevented this, or could I have known, or how could have I prepared for this? So when I started thinking about it, of course, you immediately dive into theory as a researcher, and you find that on a European level, we all find it important to have a free movement of workers. And we all know this through Article 45 of the Treaty for the Functioning of the European Union, that clearly said we want free movement of goods, people and services, and so also of workers. And then when I joined Fontys in Venlo, I found actually there's a lot going on here in this border region. And there's so many initiatives that support cross-border working and to get people from one side of the border working into the other side of the border, start using those opportunities. And, some of it, maybe, have heard of the border information point, the grensinfopunten, that inform people to make it easier to understand the fiscal impact and impact on pension, for instance. And we also have what we call cross-border job placement services, or the SGA, a great tool that actually help unemployed find jobs on the other side of the border. And so it is very important. And, a lot of organizations, the governments and the job placement agencies are working very hard to achieve that goal of free movement of workers. And this is one of the reasons. If you look on your left, you see a map of the Netherlands. And in the west of the Netherlands, there's this huge red blob, which we call the Randstad. Now, this is the picture of the Netherlands you would draw when you would look at available jobs within the Netherlands. If we shift our attention now to the right, you see a very different map of the Netherlands, and you also see a red coloring in the southeast of the country. And that happens when you include jobs within 1 hour travel distance that are also located in Germany, or in the case of the southern part of the Netherlands, also in Belgium. And so these two maps, the more it is colored red, the more jobs are available. And you can clearly see that if you take jobs on the other side of the border into account, there are much more opportunities. And so, these opportunities, that's what we're looking for. That's the chances that we want to benefit from, the opportunities to find jobs and to start working on the other side of the border. And so that's what I find very interesting. And that's why I start looking at this topic and honing in on competencies and behavior there. So as this is also a webinar slash lecture, maybe for a small part, I would just briefly like to introduce some definitions, just to give them some guidance and frame the story. So the first one, and maybe a familiar one, let's define culture. And of course, I realize that there are so many definitions out there, it's impossible to get them all together. And so I've just picked one. I happen to know that Lisa also used Hofstede in her research project. And so what Hofstede says is, culture is a collective programming of the mind that distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from another. And although this research is usually used in a country context by explaining the culture of Germany or the culture of the Netherlands, this definition would of course equally apply excuse me, to companies, for instance, which triggers the first question we always have to keep in mind: how much of what we're sharing is actually country related and how much is company related. And also, Hofstede views culture as an onion with different layers and a core in the middle. And so this outer layer of the onion is visible, and he says it's similar in culture. We have an outer layer which are symbols, like the flag of our country. It's visible for everyone. It's also recognizable as, you know, the flag of Germany is recognizable as the flag of Germany. And so we can all identify with that if you're from Germany, or if you're from the Netherlands, more with the Dutch flag. But I've also shown the European flag and the flag of the Bundesland Nordrhein-Westfalen and the flag of the province of Limburg. And so maybe those are the symbols you identify with. And one level lower, a bit more hidden, a bit more out of view are heroes. And heroes are people we look up to. And also those can differ per group. And it could be the CEO of the company you're working for. It could be the king of the country you live in. There are many different heroes. It could be Gandhi. It could be a comic book hero like Superman or Spider-Man. Especially my kids, I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and for them it's Spider-Man and Batman. So heroes differ per group of people. We also have rituals, and I think the easiest one to imagine is in a lot of companies we have a Friday afternoon drink. But that's a typical ritual that is shared with the people of that company, and they know how that drink works. Do we bring our own wine? Are we allowed to drink wine? And that's sort of a specific ritual. And then very deep within the onion, invisible for the outside world, but sometimes even invisible for yourself. You may not even be aware of it, but the values, and those are the things that you sort of grow up with, and you've internalized so much that it's sometimes difficult to make them explicit. Or to explain, a simple example maybe is, do you finish your plate after dinner? And you know, my obvious answer is yes, because I do that. Because my parents always told me, you finish your plate. But honestly, I have no idea why. Of course, I could come up with things like it's a waste to throw away stuff, so that's why, or it's polite. But in other countries, leaving something on the plate is considered to be polite, which is maybe why China recently announced a rule that everyone is supposed to finish their plate. Maybe you've heard it on the news last week. So that's more about values and rituals. But in the end, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about behavior. It's about how people behave and how that affects others. And that is a very nice bridge to competences, because also competences are about behavior. And also, just like with culture, there are so many different definitions out there. And I just present 2 here. And we can find some things they have in common, like it's a combination of knowledge, skills, attitude, behavior. And the other one states it's capabilities, standards of performance, traits, abilities. There are summaries of behavior. And then, of course, we have the competences as they are demonstrated in, for instance, a job ad, where, of course, we're not always sure if the person who drafted a job ad reflected on the true scientific definition of competences, but they usually use words that people recognize in terms of what is expected behavior. And so let's stick with summaries of behavior if we are talking about competencies, and maybe sometimes it's about skills, sometimes it's about attitude. But that's the way I would like to look at it. And here's maybe an example of what we see in a German job ad, for instance, kommunikative und leistungsfähige Persönlichkeit, Teamfähigkeit, Eigenmotivation. These are the typical words we recognize as we hear about competencies. And honestly, even if it was in my own language for a job in my own country, in the Netherlands, I wouldn't be quite sure what they mean. What is Teamfähigkeit? What does a team worker mean? So what does he or she do? It's a question, and it becomes even more difficult when you look for a job on the other side of the border. By the way, on culture, maybe you've seen the Vergütungspaket. I'm glad to see that just like in the Netherlands, also in Germany, they don't like to talk about money, because I can't find any reference to the actual reward people are getting in this job. But that's very similar in the Netherlands, I guess. Right, so now let's take you to the staffing cycle, or a model that we can use to look at recruitment. And traditionally, recruitment is seen as a series of actions. We send out a job ad, or we hire someone. But Carlson and Mary Connerly do it differently. And they think of recruitment as a series of decisions. And they cluster them in 3 phases: the start, the matching, and the actual employment. And so in the initialization, the start, there are 2 big decisions. That is D1, that is controlled by an individual. And that decision is, I want to go out on the job market. And D2 is the decision, what do we want our job ad to look like? What is in the job ad? And it ends with D7, the actual individual being hired by the company and working there and deciding that this person wants to stay with that company. And in that whole phase, there are different decisions to take. And all these decisions take place in an environment. And this environment could be influenced by culture and is influenced by the individual and by the hiring manager and maybe also by a recruiter. And it's influenced by third party. It's your spouse saying, listen, I want you to get a job closer to home, or I don't think you should take that job. Or maybe it's your mother-in-law that says, I want you to get a job that pays better. Whatever influence there is, there are always people around you trying to influence that decision somehow. And that's all part of the process. And so that's what I use to make the analysis. And that's what we'll look at, and we'll find that competencies play a role everywhere. And this, to answer the question, are you competent to cross the border? It will be very good if you are aware of these decision moments. And because these are the moments where you can actually intervene to start talking about competencies. And the first one, obviously, is, should I join the workforce? Think about what you think your competencies are and what type of job you're in, want to be in. Because when you look at the job ad, which is a result of decision 2, you can actually find the qualifications and the competencies in just like the example I've shown you a few slides ago. And that's where the comparison starts. And now you would say, I have leadership skills. And you see in the position, they require leadership skills. So at first glance, there's a match. And so you continue, should I apply for that job? And you start thinking about the position, would I like that job? What about the company? Would I like that company? And you form an expectation of that. And based on that, you decide to apply. And the fourth decision is then, based on all the interviews and assessments, the company needs to decide who to hire. And also in these phases, hopefully in those assessments, they look at the competences. And hopefully your expectations of what they expect in behavior in that assessment matches what they're looking for. And so if you're going to be assessed on leadership skills, be aware that if it's in another country, they may require different behavior compared to what is common in your own experience. And once you get the offer, that's decision number 5. Now, should you take that offer? Are you satisfied with the offer? Do you want to go ahead and start working for that firm? And you start working there and you start doing your stuff. And you get your appraisals based on competencies usually. And also there, you could perform very well, or you could perform very well based on the standards compared to your own background, but it may not be similar to what they're expecting in that company. So also in that phase, you need to be explicit about what is expected in terms of competence. Because in the end, decision number 7, you need to think for yourself, should I stay or should I go? And getting back to my kickoff of this presentation, I took the decision to go because I, at several stages, just didn't look into the exact behavior. I looked at the company, I liked the company, I looked at the job, I liked the job, but I neglected to dive that level deeper into the expected behavior and make that explicit in conversations and talks. So to me, that will be a very important lesson, and one that I've since then, whenever I'm applying, I'm much more explicit about that. The research we're doing within our research group on cross-border recruitment, on the cross-border labor market, I would say that what I'm about to tell you on competencies and job ads is very much part of this D2 element, the decision number 2 in the cycle. So what capabilities do we put in a job ad? And for instance, the research that Lisa will present is much more part of where the matching and the employment takes place. So the actual behavior that is visual in relation to a competence. And hopefully we will be able in the future, by doing different research projects, to cover the entire scope. That will be very nice. And we're sort of building on that. We also had a graduation project, for instance, about onboarding of cross-border workers. And so that was really about decision number 5 and 6, sort of the decision to actually go work there and 1 year after employment. So there we keep on building and hopefully be able to expand on our portfolio on this. For my research project that I started about a year ago, I actually looked into a lot of different job ads for the same job. And so I looked at logistics manager because that's an important industry here within the region. And of course, I realized that logistic manager, the can be very different per company or per industry. But this was a starting point, and it was a way of getting a look and feel. If you are a logistics manager at the moment and you're looking for a new position and you would look across the border, what are the competencies that I see? And so here, for instance, in this specific ad, we would see Analyse und Problemlösefähigkeit und Führungsfähigkeit. And so I noted those down. I did that for a lot of vacancies. I looked at a total of 100 different vacancies. Not all were applicable because although they were called logistics manager, they really meant something else, or it was a level within the company that was either too high or too low. So I took a medium level job and I compared them and put them all together and then looked at which competencies do they actually mention in job vacancies without looking at the qualitative impact. So without looking at what they mean, just looking at, are they mentioning it, yes or no? And then this is what I found. And I made a ranking of, on top, the one that is mentioned most. And so here's a top 10. And also realize, of course, that they always mention more competencies, more than one competency usually per ad. But the thing that the ads had in common, and that's good news, so we have things in common, is you need to be communicative and you have to have analytical skills. And then, of course, the question still remains, whatever that means. But yeah, that's the way they communicate the job. And then you start to see some differences in the job. Although they have like flexibility that's required for both on both sides of the border, albeit on a different level. Yeah, on the German side, the team player and the self-starter was a bit more emphasized, I thought. And also on the Dutch side, it seemed to me that words like customer-oriented seems to be used more often compared to on the German side. That seemed to be more an internal view in terms of the organizational skill, the team player, the self-starter. It's all about how you work within your context, while the proactive, result-oriented and customer-oriented person, that seems to be more towards getting results and looking for what does the client want. And I don't know if that's true, if that's really how it's meant, but that is sort of the way I start thinking about this. And that triggered the question, okay, but what do I really know? I need to look at the qualitative impact. And Lisa will take you into that later on. But this was sort of the starting point, and for me, the trigger to start examining the qualitative impact. What I also want to share with you is there are some things that I absolutely did not see in German job ads, but I did see in the Dutch ones. By the way, I can't actually see at this moment the MS Teams environment, so I don't know if people have questions or raise their hands. So Vincent, just a quick check with you. If all still okay and there are no questions as yet.
So far, Peter, there are no questions yet. So
good. Yeah.
Feel free to continue.
All right, good. So if you could let me know if there's something in the chat, a question that I could address, then that will be great. So in the Netherlands, we see things like coaching. You need to be convincing, ownership, inspirator, and I did not see those competencies or that types of behavior in German ads. And for instance, something like convincing, overtuigend, overtuigingskracht in Dutch. I can imagine, you know, in the Netherlands, we are all about finding a compromise. And so you do not tell people what to do, but you try to convince them to take your point of view. While in Germany, it may be much easier in terms of, you know, this is what we're going to do. And so people will do it. I realize I'm stereotyping, but we're talking about culture and behavior, and there some stereotyping, unfortunately, is required, or at least allowed. And then the other way around, in the German ads, and that was something I did not see in the particular ads I looked at in the Netherlands, was, for instance, quality mindset, managing opposite interests and perseverance. And that was also, in more German ads, I could see competences that related to stress and difficult negotiations, belastbaarheid in German. And so that was also a different flavor, if you will, to the position. And so there, yeah, here we are with a set of similarities, but a lot of questions as to what is actually meant. And also for you, if you're a job seeker, or for you, if you're a hiring manager, whenever you have something like team player in your ad, and you get someone from the other side of the border, you know, it could make sense to actually start discussing what that person understands team playing to be.
Peter, may I interrupt you?
Yeah.
I see Jan Lucas is raising his hand, so I guess he will has a question for you.
Yeah,
Jan?
yeah.
Yeah, Pieter, sorry for interrupting you. Just a question that just came into my mind. In your opinion, what is it that that employers put emphasis on in these ads? Is it the things that they consider as essential for the job, or is it eventually things that they consider as like difficult to find among the typical applicant? So, if, for example, something that they usually don't write in the ad, is it that they don't consider it as important, or do they think that this is something that typically every applicant should provide anyway, so self-evident?
Yeah, so what I see, and I'm here also sort of looking back into my experience as an HR professional. In my experience as an HR professional, the companies I've worked for, we really looked at the job and sort of the competences that were required there. And some companies have like some companies have core competences that they want to have in there, and then they look at the job and just put those in there. Having said that, your question also came to my mind when I look at the German side of, for instance, something like flexibility, and that's because in a previous experience I also seen that the amount of rules that are present in and the process-oriented approach in many German companies, again stereotyping. I can very well imagine that if you as a company want to move away from that, you're really looking for a different personality, and therefore you put that in. So it's you know, I would have to guess and have to imagine what companies mean, because I haven't asked them. So as a scientific answer, it's not much, but I think that the basis is what they require for a job, and maybe then something they add of value to add to their team as a specific skill. I hope that answers your question, Jan.
Thank you.
So I've been talking enough, and I would like to do a bit of an experiment. And what I will do is, there are 2 links here in this presentation. I will put them in the chat. And I would like all the people who are Dutch or feel most affiliated with the Netherlands to click on the link that I put with Survey Nederlands. And I would like all the people who are German or feel most affiliated to Germany to click on the other link. And once you've done that, there are 4 questions I'd like you to ask, 4 dilemmas. You can click on Senden or Versturen, and I will get the answers. In the meantime, Lisa will then do a presentation, and after her presentation, I will get back to you with the outcome of the survey, and maybe we can discuss a bit about that. So let's see how we can make that work. Because I would need to copy these links into the chat. So if you bear with me for a second. This is one. We have the Survey Netherlands. And then here's the link for the German ones. So please click on the link, answer those 4 questions. I will give you 2 or 3 minutes to do so. And I realize now I made a mistake. I forgot to include a waiting music theme, but that's too late now. So we'll just have to wait in silence and maybe I can even already see how many people actually answered. Ah, good. The answers are coming in now. 2, yeah. Very nice, very nice. And then hopefully later on, after Lisa's presentation, we'll get the answers of the survey, and then I will also do a wrap up, and hopefully we will be able to answer the question, are you competent to cross the border?
Thanks, Pieter. Maybe this is the moment then already to ask Lisa to share, first of all, her presentation or her screen so I can see her PowerPoint slides. A very kind question to Lisa also in terms of the time, if you can take a small look at the time so that we're not running out of time and that we have enough time to have a fruitful discussion afterwards, hopefully, and that Pieter has a chance, of course, to share the outcomes of the survey which is going on at the moment. So, Lisa, may I invite you?
Can you see my screen?
Yes, and could you put it on a PowerPoint or presentation or a slideshow?
One moment.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
Perfect.
So.
Yes, we can perfectly see it, Lisa. Thanks. So feel free to start whenever you're ready.
All right. So as I just told you, I worked on the topic working in cross-border areas. And during my bachelor thesis, I focused on the analysis of differences regarding competences between Germany and the Netherlands, especially in the Euregio Rhine-Maas North. Okay, why is it not working? So this is my agenda for today. I will shortly state the problem context. I will present my chosen competences for the report, and I will go through 2 research questions and present my results of the project. And in the end, I will shortly state conclusions and recommendations. So when I started working on my report, I came across several sources that assumed that competences are understood in the same way in different cultures. So like Pieter also already told you. I didn't even find a clear definition of the word competence. So several sources even stated that there is no clear definition. So I asked myself, how can people assume that a competence is understood in the same way through different cultures and countries if there isn't a clear definition in the first place? And I also found out that the majority of international business people are still not aware on the cultural impact on their work, which obviously leads to a lot of misunderstandings in the team. So my problem question was, what differences regarding competences exist between Germany and the Netherlands? And here you can see the competences I focused on in my project. I decided that I don't want to focus on the culture only, but I also focused on the differences of or between employees and team leaders / managers in the middle management. And therefore, I decided to focus on competences that really include the interaction and communication between at least 2 people. So in the end, these 6 were left. So I focused on leadership, ability to communicate, dealing with conflict, teamwork, openness to criticism, and giving feedback. And I think a few of these are also often stated in work descriptions or job descriptions. so one of my research questions was what differences of competences exist between Germany and the Netherlands, which was also my problem question. And I started with a cultural analysis and used the 6 dimensions of Hofstede and Ahrensmeyer cultural map. Based on these findings, I conducted several interviews with people from Germany and the Netherlands in the Euregio. And based on these findings, I created several dilemmas for each of the competences. And I assume that every one of you knows what I mean with a dilemma in this case. So if not, feel free to ask, but I guess you will also see later on what I mean with it. And yeah, based on these dilemmas, I created a survey, which I conducted on both sides of the border to really get a quantitative outcome as well, and to prove my findings from the analysis and the interviews. So, in the following, I will present some of the results. Here you can see the first dilemma or the first outcome, and it's about hierarchies. So the respondents had the choice between the preferences of flat hierarchies or steep hierarchies in the company. And you can clearly see that Dutch people really go for flat hierarchies, while the Germans prefer the steep ones. You can also see that German team leaders prefer steep hierarchies way more than German employees who are kind of undecided here, or who also go for the flat ones. And maybe some of you have an idea why this is the case. Or maybe some of you already had experience with this. So if anyone wants to share ideas. Well, if not, then I will explain it later, because I found out why the German employees also go for the flat ones, flat hierarchies, which was pretty unexpected, because normally in Germany steep hierarchies are normal.
Lisa, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you. One of the participants, Hidde, is asking you, what is your question exactly, what you wanted to ask the participants, maybe once again.
Okay, so here you can see the options they have, and I asked them what is the preference. So if you prefer steep hierarchies in your company, or if you prefer flat ones. And so all dilemmas I asked about were about the preference. I hope this answers the question.
What did you want to ask us? I mean, people are listening at the moment. Sorry.
Now I want to ask if anyone has an idea why the German employees rather go for the flat hierarchies, because it's not quite normal for German people.
Okay, do you have a suggestion, or do you want to answer the question yourself, or was just you did just ask?
We're going to answer the question in a few moments.
Okay, great.
Maybe someone has some ideas or experience, but if not, I will just go on. So another outcome of my survey was about the role of the manager, and here the respondents had the choice between the preferences if the team leader controls the work, or if as an employee has own responsibilities, so no control of the manager or team leader afterwards, and you can decide on your own what to do. On the side, I always included some quotes of the interviews. As you see here, for example, employees are trusted, they have own control about their task, and trust has a special role between the team leader and the leader. And if you look at the diagram, you can probably guess which quote was about which country here. And also in this case, the Dutch people really prefer the own responsibilities, while German ones go for the control of the team leader. which was probably also expected by most of you. So another thing is the punctuality, which is quite the same. Germans really prefer punctuality, and Dutch, for Dutch people, it's okay to be a few minutes late. And one interviewee also stated that if you're not on time in the first meeting, people are likely to not schedule a second meeting with you, which is probably very common in Germany, while it is not that common in the Netherlands, as people are more flexible than the Germans. So, yeah. More outcomes were, so some of my findings were really expected, and also I already found them out during the culture analysis and the interviews, but some of them were really unexpected, like here. So even if Germans are really punctual and Dutch are more flexible, both of them have a similar meeting culture. So both prefer meetings that are not stretched longer, as well as the agenda. So both cultures really prefer to discuss only agenda topics and not new topics, which was quite unexpected. So also, if any one of you has some experiences that fits to the outcomes, you are free to share your experience with one of the cultures.
En hoeveel likes heeft die van ons tweeën?
Maybe I'm too late. I was just wondering, Lisa.
Yeah.
I don't see the balance that I expected to see then, because you told me that they look alike, but I see big fluctuations, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Here in the diagram.
Mm-hmm.
But if you compare these ones with these ones, then you see that it's quite the same. So most of the Dutch people or German people really prefer the same.
Yeah, and I see that exactly in the Dutch team leaders. I see that they are more growing towards each other.
Mm-hmm.
So you see that the Dutch are getting more to the stretchy side, and the Germans are more going to not stretch. Yeah, well, they seem to atypically improve. Yeah. Well, that's a good one. Yeah, for the Dutch team leaders and the German team leaders, it's still quite different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's very illogical. Yeah, it also depends on who you were able to ask these questions, of course. Is that something you will explain later?
No, but I can answer your question.
All right, thank you.
So as I said, I conducted the survey on both sides. So I had an equal number of Dutch and German respondents. I of course had more respondents who work as an employee than as a team leader. But when I calculated the numbers or the outcomes, I used percentages, which leads to an reliable or more reliable outcome. So, and I also had a reliable number of respondents. So I don't know if this was your question.
Yeah, that's enough. Of course, I could. I believe that everything in your research is structured, and also with all the rules and regulations, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really interesting to have this sketched in graph. So thank you very much. It's a confirmation of what you seem to know, but it's still there's a lot of fluctuation going on. I didn't expect it that much, so it's really interesting.
Yeah, of course, there are still differences between each of the diagrams here. But what I wanted to say is that if you see this diagram, and you really can see that Dutch are really flexible. If you compare it with the German ones, then, or at least I expected that the Dutch are also more flexible if it comes to the length of a meeting, which is definitely not the case here. So you can see that Dutch and German people answered or had the same preference.
Really interesting. Yeah.
And also with the agenda, so that both cultures are not that flexible, or at least the majority of the respondents are not that flexible regarding new topics on the agenda.
Yeah. And all the interviews were in the sort of, so to say, the region, in a circle around Venlo, right? So you don't have people from the Randstad, for instance, from
No.
Amsterdam.
Unfortunately, it was also very difficult to receive some answers due to Corona, especially from companies, as they were busy with other things.
Yeah.
So
It is what it is. Yeah. But well done. Yeah, and you can always follow up on this research.
Yeah.
Because I'm really curious how the trend will be for the future. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, then I will go on with another research question. And in this question, I also focused on other aspects than culture. So I also asked about age, gender, and work experience. So if they worked in the home country, the neighbor country, or even in both countries, to see if this also influenced the outcome of the survey. And here's the diagram about the hierarchies again. You just saw that the German employees had a preference for flat hierarchies, which is very unexpected because, normally in Germany is known for steep hierarchies. And here you can see why, because it is influenced by the age group. The younger people really prefer flat hierarchies. This is also what I found out during the interviews, and the survey just you can clearly see that the older age groups really go for steep hierarchies, but the younger ones really want to have something to say, prefer flat hierarchies, which of course influence the outcome on the first diagram you just saw.
Lisa, may I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
I think it's a very interesting graph and overview you're showing us in terms of different language groups. What does that mean, in your opinion, for business life in the future, if this young group of people is preferring more and more flat hierarchies in comparison to the older people? Need businesses to change their way of working, or how do you see this?
I think that in the future, so if the younger generation are going to receive some manager positions or even CEO positions, that the companies are going to switch to flat hierarchies, or at least to not that steep hierarchies anymore.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying in the first year, starting as juniors, they enter a company which is following a more steep hierarchy probably, but as soon as they will enter the, let's say the management team or other managing positions, then they get the chance to transform the company in flatter organizations.
Yeah, I think so. Of course, it's not possible in all companies, especially in big ones, and it's probably it doesn't apply for every girl or boy or age group, but I think it's going to change.
Yeah, interesting. I'm curious to what clash that could lead in different companies maybe on both sides of the border. I don't want to be rude, but may I ask you to go to the finish of your presentation in terms of the time? And I'm quite punctual and in terms of culture.
Yeah, sure.
Although I'm Dutch, yeah.
Okay, here it's quite the same. So you can also see that younger people in Germany prefer a better work-life balance, which probably will also change in the next few years. They go for normal working hours, and no benefits instead for long working hours, even though if the company offers some benefits. And here you can see a result found regarding the gender. So you can clearly see that the Dutch, that women in general, Dutch and German women, prefer to address a problem or an issue indirectly, while men are going to address everything very directly. And yeah, so my conclusions, just short, is that differences between the of competences definitely exist between both countries. As you just saw, I found out several differences, also similarities, but I only focused on the differences in my report. So I would recommend that further analysis of my data and also of the whole framework should be done in order to find out more about the differences, why there are differences. So as you saw, it's not only cultural influenced, but also by gender, age group, maybe the company. Yeah, so these are my recommendations. And this is the end of my presentation.
Well,
Okay.
thank you, Lisa. Yeah, Pieter, I would just give like the word back to you. So to show us the outcomes of the questionnaire, I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to try to. So bear with me. This is sort of a technological experiment, at least for me. So let's see if we can make this work. I'm going to share my screen now with you. And so now you should see my screen with, on the left-hand side, a pie chart in red and blue, and on the right-hand side, a pie chart in blue and red. Vincent, give a shout out if that's not the case.
It's perfect.
So first disclaimer, I notice now that the questions are not in the same order. So although these pie charts may seem to signify a huge difference, actually it's pretty much the same. So where you see red on the Dutch questionnaire on the left, you see the same answer highlighted in blue on the one on the right. So apologize for that confusion, but the bottom line is here. And again, you know, culture is about stereotypes, and as Lisa has shown, those stereotypes may not always be applicable. And that's also what we see here, because although there is a difference, we still see that the majority of our respondents, of you guys, think pretty much alike. And just to give you that information, we have 17 German responses and Dutch. We have 13 Dutch responses. So moving on to the next question, and there the questions are in the same order. It's the question about communication, the type of communication you prefer, and do you communicate on higher levels in the organization very easily, or a few levels down, or do you follow the chain of hierarchy? And there on the Dutch side, it's very evident that you pretty much communicate where you need to communicate, and we still see some use of the formal line in the German side of the group. Now, in terms of responsibility, the team leader checks the work of the employees to make sure that they don't make mistakes. Also, we see a bit of a difference, but it's not that big. It was to be expected that this difference was there. But yeah, it's also interesting to see that the differences, these stereotypes that we used in the dilemmas, or let's say the assumptions based on known data on culture, yeah, that there's much more nuance to that in the discussion. And maybe it's also because of this border region. That's a whole different question, whether you have a common identity or a common culture within the border region. Maybe that's something for a next research project or webinar. And then the questions from your employee, and I think that's an interesting difference. On the Dutch side, it's very clear. The manager is more or less a coach that helps the employee find the solution, while in the German context, the chef usually gives the solution to the employee to start working further. So that's also very interesting, and also can determine your way of working, having that liberty of being able to present your own solution, come up with your own solution versus getting the solution. The latter may be easier and give more confidence, so you don't have to take responsibility. And on the other hand, yeah, there's a more levels of freedom. And we had a discussion last week with some German and Dutch employees in another webinar, and there one of the conclusions was, but that freedom, it didn't work for some of the German colleagues we had in the Netherlands. And also the other way around, maybe some of the Dutch work very well in the German context where there's less freedom. But the conclusion was also, maybe working across the border is not for everyone. And that's also something for you that you can think of and keep in mind, which makes it all the more interesting to sort of go through the phases of that staffing cycle and see where and check if the behavior that you feel comfortable with is actually what is being asked for. And so that concludes the summary of our little online survey. Now I'll try to switch back to my PowerPoint and make a few closing remarks. Let me see. It is clearly thinking about it and not sure if it would like to start up. There it is. There it's not. Let me see.
We only see, Pieter, the welcoming slide at the moment.
Yeah, and I'm sort of, which is in, oh, okay, so I'll just click through there. And somehow I only see half of it. But I drafted the damn thing, so I should know what's on there. So yeah, so to summarize, you know, the question, are you competent across the border? So the easy answer is you would have to find out for yourself. But I hope that I've given you some food for thought in terms of in which phase of the whole recruitment process should I look. And also maybe through presenting the results from Lisa's survey, we've been able to trigger some questions that you could ask and trigger some thought on, you know, are the difference that big? And, you know, maybe I need to look also in terms of gender or age to see what there are differences. And so that sort of concludes the input part. And now, you know, what's next? I think a very interesting topic that is raised through this research is, are we talking about company culture and country culture, for instance? And so how is the relation between those two? So far, we've looked pretty much at cross-border recruitment in terms of, you know, are we going through the process and how many people get hired? And then it stops. And what I really would like to look into further into the future is actually, do people stay at the company? How does that onboarding process go on? And after 1 year or 2 years, do people in this cross-border environment still work with that company? And if not, what were the reasons they're gone? And if yes, what were the reasons that they're staying? And there's definitely not very much research on that last part. And what we also would like to do as a research group is we will be very interested in collecting, sorry, what's, and I wanted to switch back. Somehow it doesn't. I'm sorry, I for some reason, I'm only seeing half a screen. So the message is we would like to collect interesting recruitment stories. So if you know anyone, if you have an experience yourself, if you know anyone with an interesting, weird, frustrating beautiful, heartwarming recruitment story in this cross-border recruitment context, then we would like to get in touch with you, and we would like to see if we can collect some stories and put them together. And so if you do, yeah, feel free to reach out to me. We are looking forward to hearing from you, and also feel free to forward my email address to anyone you think may have that interesting story. And last but not least, to further work on this project, we have developed or are developing a competency game where we do a workshop with representatives from Dutch and German companies. We bring them together and we actually start finding the right competencies for a vacancy and start discussing what behavior they expect so that they can learn from each other. And so, yeah, if you find that interesting, if you would like to find out more about that, please reach out to us. Here's my email, and you can also reach me through LinkedIn or to Ting. And so hopefully we'll be in touch about this topic later on. The only thing left is to thank you very much for your participation, for listening, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to each other in the near future about the next interesting topic about cross-border job placements.
Well, thank you, Pieter. Also from my side, thank you, Lisa, for your valuable contributions to all of you. Maybe one final question or chance to ask a final pending question at the moment. If not, I just want to share with you finally that this presentation is recorded and will be published online in a couple of days on our website, fontys.nl/cbbd, which stands for Cross-Border Business Development. And I hope to see you all soon during our next and final webinar of this year on the 19th of November, when our research colleague, Mrs. Martina Simone, will present her research about the cross-cultural setting in this cross-border region, with the central question, can we speak about a common cross-border culture in this border region, ? That question will be answered next time. Thank you very much for attending, and hope to see you soon again. Have a nice evening.